So all of the lost boys in Peter Pan have definitely grown up because all they want to do is down Wendy. She has the magnetism of the Bermuda Triangle and I'm a plane desperate to land. Like, oh, please, just kill me. Hi, so instead of doing like a regular book review, I decided to do a get ready with me while I review some books. I have, I think, 7 books that I wanted to discuss and I might just get ready while I'm at it. Without further ado, let's get into the reviews. Firstly, I'm gonna put up my hair. So the first book I wanted to talk about is Regrettably, I'm About to Cause Trouble by Aimee McNee. This book is a historical fantasy and is set during the Tudor period. We follow this girl called Maud who is basically being wed off to this nobleman, but she has a very large birthmark across her abdomen and also partly across her thighs. And because of that, she's being marked as a witch because in the Tudor period, very large birthmarks or just birthmarks in general were considered to be like the mark of the witch. And also like obviously evil. When she's, you know, doing the consummation of the marriage, the husband notices that she has a very large birthmark and she gets shunned. Instead of going back to her family because she's obviously quite ashamed and she's also afraid that her family will reject her, she, funnily enough, ironically enough, finds refuge at this small coven of witches, and there she surely but gradually becomes very like in tune with witchcraft. She starts to learn the craft and becomes quite talented at it. So talented so that at some point she gets invited by the court, by the Tudor court, to kind of be like entertainment for them, and from then on out she becomes quite confident in her craft and powerful in her own right. I personally really love this book. This is kind of a unexpected favorite thanks to Aimee from Aimee Reads. I think she read it like at the start of this year, and when I saw her video I immediately picked it up. It is such a anachronistic kind of story. The writing of this does not really fit the Tudor era, but for some reason it works so well. I also really loved the queer representation. There's a queer sapphic couple in the story as well. I just loved how quirky and how witty the characters were. I also personally really enjoyed the show The Tudors. If you've ever watched that show, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, You Have My Heart. This book kind of brought me back to the time where I read a lot of like Philippa Gregory and I was completely immersed in the Tudor and the Elizabethan era. In this book, Maud like talks to Henry VIII and with Queen Anne Boleyn and with Jane Seymour, so it was very amusing to read that as a book. I wouldn't describe this as like a historical novel, more like a half historical novel slash fantasy. I very much enjoyed it and it was kind of like a hidden gem for me. I ended up giving this 5 stars, probably one of my favorite books I've read this year. Next, I wanted to talk about this book called The Never King. I picked this one up because it was just on my app on Storytel. This is by Nikki Crowe, and this, sorry, I'm opening my sunscreen package. It's like a dark romance fairy tale retelling. Long story short, this is a modern reverse harem Peter Pan retelling. So all of the lost boys in Peter Pan have definitely grown up because all they want to do is down Wendy. I would not be able to tell you what the plot of this book is. They just kidnap Wendy at some point and then they just take turns f***ing her. That is essentially the entire plot. I did not know what this book was going to be about. I just picked it up on a whim and I have regrets. 1 star, would not recommend unless this is your type of, like, if this is something you enjoy. But yeah, not for me, sadly. The next book I wanted to talk about is The List by Yomi Adegoke. This is a book that I would describe as sort of like a Me Too book. It's a thriller about this happily engaged black couple who are about to get married. I think they're like a month away from actually getting married until a list drops on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, where the man and a lot of other men get accused of all types of assault, being it sexual assault, being like batter, all kinds of things, just basically generally nasty stuff. Now the woman works for a publication that kind of focuses on these kinds of cases. Like, she's a journalist and she typically advocates for the victims and wants to get their stories and their voices out there. So she's very conflicted because on the one hand, this is the guy of her dreams. She wants to marry this guy, but on the other hand, her morals are telling her to call it quits. This is a book I've been quite torn about for a very long time. I don't really know how I feel about it, just because the husband in this case, according to the narrative, is innocent, and the only reason why he's on this list of predators is because he cheated on his fiance in this case, and the fiance put him on the list as sort of a revenge for everything that he did to her. By making this kind of like this revenge narrative, it almost comes across as though we should not be believing the victim every single time, and I think that's a very dangerous view to perpetuate. Sometimes the woman in the story, like the fiance, comes across as like an apologist towards her fiance, but then again she also hires a private investigator because she's distrustful of him. For the longest time too, the narrative made me believe that the guy in this situation, because I think it's dual POV, that the guy in the situation was like an unreliable narrator and was just pretending that he was being truthful. I think in the end, the goal of this book was kind of to critique the idea of trial by media, which in my opinion is still quite a dangerous thing to do. Like, I 100% stand behind the fact that we should always be believing the victim in the first place, but by doing this trial by medium, you're also putting the victim at danger and you're causing a potential harmful situation for the victim in this case. Aside from that, I also still believe that there is something like, I put way too much blush on here. Aside from that, I also still believe in democracy and we should give people the chance to defend themselves in court and not in the public space. To summarize, I don't know if I agree with the approach of the author to talk about the subject, but I do have to give it credit for making me talk and think about this book for longer than I thought I would. Like, it really has resonated with me and I still think about it quite regularly, so that is for me typically a sign that it's a very good book. So I ended up giving it a 4-star rating. But yeah, definitely check it out for yourself. It is, like I said, quite tricky subject matter and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Moving on, I wanted to talk about All Roads Lead Here. This is a contemporary romance where we follow a woman who has recently been broken up with. She was in a very long-term relationship with this musician. To kind of have like a fresh start, she decides to move back to her hometown in Colorado and rents out this apartment space. When getting to Colorado, she realizes it was not like the actual owner of the apartment that put up the apartment, but it was actually his son. The owner is like this rugged type guy, not very talkative, and he's quite like upset with his son because he did not want the apartment space to be rented out. He just wanted to have like a quiet summer. But after some back and forth, he reluctantly agrees and she's able to stay there for, I think, they started off with 1 month. But obviously our main character, her name is Aurora by the way, ends up falling for this rugged, standoffish man. Aside from that, also she has to face some bittersweet memories because her mother actually went missing in the area that she's staying at when she was hiking. So she's kind of like trying to retrace her steps by following this journal that she inherited from her and discovering her passion for hiking while having to deal with these memories resurfacing. Honestly, this is typically a book that I would genuinely enjoy. Like, I love contemporary romances. I love that when it's just like a slow burn, but this book was just too slow of a burn. Like, this is a very chunky book. I think the audiobook was like, I want to say like 20 hours. It was a ridiculous amount of time. I think you could have told the story in like 2/3 of the time that it took. Like, it was way too long-winded. It took a long time for the romance to actually happen, and I love me a slow burn, but this just was way too slow. I personally would not recommend it. If you're a fan of a slow burn, give it a shot, but to me it was just way too long and it could have dealt with some good editing. So I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. But yeah, maybe you enjoy this one more than I do. I have another contemporary romance. This time it's The Roughest Draft by, hold on, I'm gonna read this off, Wibberley and Austin-Siegemund Broka. This is the same author couple that wrote the breakup tour that I did a reading vlog on. You can find it here somewhere. That was inspired by Taylor Swift. I was not as impressed by the breakup tour as I would have wanted to be. This book is like the author shipping themselves with each other because this is essentially about a writers couple who have had a very successful run. They've been writing books together for a very long time, but they had a falling out and hadn't been talking to each other for, I think, 5 or 6 years. But their agent, who also happens to be the girl's fiance at this point, convinces them to write one more book to fulfill their contract with their publishing house. Of course, they end up agreeing and they rent out this small house slash cottage in the middle of nowhere and just lock themselves up and write this last damn book that they have to do to fulfill their contract. The story is told in 2 timelines. So you have the now, where they're kind of arguing and writing this book together, and you have the past, where you learn what led to their initial falling apart. I personally really liked this romance in particular because it kind of reminded me of Emily Henry's books. Her romances don't read like regular romances in the sense that a lot of her characters and a lot of her storylines are a lot more fleshed out. They almost are like contemporary novels with a romance plot in it, and I kind of felt the same thing with this one. I also really liked how meta this book is. Like, obviously we're dealing with two authors who are writing a book on two authors. Like, it's a really fun concept to me, and they executed it very well in my opinion. Hold on, I'm gonna focus on my eyeliner for a bit. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. It also has some typical romance tropes that I quite enjoy, like it has forced proximity, it has friends to lovers, but it feels more than just those tropes. Like, it is a very fleshed out storyline. The characters feel very grounded and very real to me. I would very much recommend it if you're a fan of Emily Henry's writing. I ended up giving this book a 4-star rating, so do with that what you will. Next up, I read The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. If you do not know what this book is about, this is a very viral book on TikTok about essentially Walt Disney. This is Walt Disney fanfiction. We follow a billionaire called Rowan who ends up inheriting the massive amusement park called Dreamland. But in order to like fully claim ownership of this amusement park, he is forced to, according to the contract, like make the amusement park better in whatever aspect. So what ends up happening is he becomes like the creative director for the amusement park for a month and basically asks everyone to send in potential ideas for rides, for floats, like everything that could make the park better. Our love interest, her name is Zara, ends up submitting a idea. Now Zara works at the beauty parlor at Dreamland. She's been dreaming of becoming a dreamer, so someone who makes the rides and the floats at Dreamland for a very long time. Now, in a very drunk mood, Zara ends up basically submitting a complete teardown / critique of one of the rides of the existing amusement park. Like, she just completely destroys the concept of it. She's like, it sucks, this is what I would have done, I would have improved it, yada yada yada. And she thinks like, okay, this was my chance, I will never be able to become a dreamer. But obviously, because this is an absurd romance, Rowan is impressed by her idea and she gets hired as a dreamer, and this is also where their romance sets off. Now, I mainly started reading this book because the Book Leo had posted a reading vlog on this book. It sounded so unserious that I was like, yeah, I want to read this myself. But it's just really trash. Rowan is this massive billionaire, but he cares nothing for his employees at the Dreamland Park. Like, he barely pays the minimum wage, they don't get any decent healthcare, and Zara is very much like an advocate for the rights of the employees of the park, but she does end up like dating Rowan despite wanting to fight for the other employees and being like an advocate for employees' rights. She ends up being like the biggest hypocrite because she enjoys all of the luxuries and advantages that Rowan gets from basically exploiting his employees. Like, Zara gets to jet set around the world and have like fancy dinners and stuff like that, while all at the same time being like, yeah, but we need to give our employees equal rights and we should not be exploiting them. But here I am at this massive estate drinking my glass of champagne. Like, it's just so silly. I was also frustrated by the fact that this is so Grumpy X Sunshine. Like, I've read my fair share of Grumpy X Sunshine romances. I don't mind that trope. I actually think it's quite cute. In this case, it was just too much. Rowan is like, I'm this broody bad guy who just wants money and I don't care about my employees. Like, I'm just want money. And then there's Zara who's like, oh my god, I love the world, I love the sunshine. Like, you know what? Let me just read some of the lines that these characters say to convince you how awful this book is. So, Rowan, I squat like my trousers aren't worth an entire month's rent. Then there's Zara. How can we appreciate the sun every morning if we don't live in the dark? Or, he walks with the confidence of a man with a large who knows how to use it. She has the magnetism of the Bermuda Triangle and I'm a plane, desperate to land. Like, oh, please, just kill me. Sometimes I'm in the mood for these types of books that just end up rotting my brain. So I ended up giving this a 2-star rating. It was fun while you're in it, but in hindsight it's just really bad. Lastly, I wanted to talk about The Scandalous Life of Ruby Devereaux by Mandy Robotham. This is kind of like historical fiction slash a fictional biography. I picked this book up because it was kind of like being marketed as like the new Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and if you know me, you know that that is one of my favorite books of all time. I adored that book to no end. I think it's also probably heavily inspired by it because we follow this woman called Ruby Devereaux, who is at this point 90+ year writer. She's a very successful writer. She's written basically in every single genre possible, but her publisher basically asked her to write one last book. She needs to fulfill one more book in her contract. Please make it an autobiography because she has had the most spectacular, adventurous life possible, and they want to hear all of the deets. They want to hear the tea. They want to know who she's dating, what she's done in her life, and she ends up reluctantly agreeing. She's like, okay, let this be my final hurrah. With the help of a transcriptionist called Jude, she ends up chronicling her entire life from, I think, wartime England to like the war in Vietnam. She's also involved in spying at some point. Like, she has had a very well-traveled life. Now, would I recommend this if you're a fan of the Seven Husbands? Yes and no. For me, this is kind of Seven Husbands, but from Target, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, Target is a perfectly fine store. It does not have the same magic as the Seven Husbands has. In the Seven Husbands, obviously, we meet 7 different husbands that Evelyn has had. In Ruby Devereaux, I think the count ends up at like 12 men. I do have to give the author credit because not all of the men are like romantic love interests. It's also just men that have had a big impact on Ruby's life. However, 12 men is just too much. This book was just way too long. All of the experiences that Ruby had and all of the men that she met along the way, it became too much to the point that I just did not believe any of the things that were happening. I know that this is fiction and obviously like you kind of have to have like the suspense of disbelief or whatever, but it just went from one thing to the other. I'm like, there's no way that you're both a wartime journalist and a spy and you become like this assistant of some writer in Paris. Like, there's no way that you can have lived so many multiple lives. Even if you're Ruby Devereaux in this case, like I found it a bit too unbelievable. At the end of the book, the author also tries to do like this plot twist kind of thing that Taylor Jenkins Reid does in The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but it just doesn't work as well. For the most part, I was just like, you're trying to do a Taylor Jenkins Reid move, but like I said, from Target, it's just not convincing enough for me. I mean, if you want something similar, you could check it out, but I just personally was not very impressed. I think in the end, I gave it 3 stars, so it's not bad. It does not have the same magic as The Seven Husbands, so I hope you enjoyed this. Get ready with me while I review some books. Do let me know what you've been reading lately, and if there are any books that you gave 5 stars recently, I'd love to know. Let me take down my hair for a second. Ooh. Oh no. Let me know if I should do this again sometime, and thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you found some new books to look forward to and some books to avoid, and I'll catch you in my next video. Goodbye.